So how do you look at a square root function? Well, a square root function is just a simple function that contains a square root in it. Know that some function or some equations that have square roots in them are not necessarily functions, but the ones we're going to look at here are. So the first thing I want to do is take a look at these three equations here, and I want to put them in a graphing calculator and take a peek at what these kind of things do. So if you could set up your calculator so that you're under your y equals, you have y equals the square root of x, and y equals the square root of x plus 1, and y equals the square root of x minus 2. And if you need help going through that, I can show you how to do that here in just a second. And then I want to set up my window to be a -4 through 7. And my y to be a -4 to 4, just so I can really zoom in on the part of the graph that we're talking about here. So let me go grab my calculator, and I'll go down to the next screen so you can see my calculator. And so that is the calculator we were talking about. I'm going to turn it on. And I already have these functions in there, but let me delete them and then re-enter them. So I'll just clear them out of there, and you can see how I put them in there. So to get a square root on the calculator, maybe I should put it down here and get the glare off of it. There, that's better. So glare is off the calculator. I have a second button, and then I have my square. But above the square, you can see the little yellow square root symbol. So I go second square to get a square root. And then my first one was just an x, so my x button is right here. So I push my x button, and then I end my parentheses. And if I want to set up my window, I'm just going to look at this first one first. My window is right here. I put in my window, and I wanted my x min to be a -4, my x max to be a 7, my scale, what are the little tick marks on the side going to be, and the bottom going to do? I want them to count by ones. My y min will be a -4, my y max will be a 4, and again my scale is going to be 1. When I'm done with all that, I hit graph, and you'll see that it graphs a half of a parabola, basically. It's not really, it's a square root function. Notice it does not go negative because you can't square root a negative number without coming out with an imaginary, and we can't graph imaginary items. So I'm going to go back to my y equals button here. I'm going to put in the rest of those. So my next one that I wanted was the second square or square root, and I wanted my x again. And then outside of my square root, I wanted to add 1. So I wanted to square root the x and then add 1 to it. I'm going to take a look at the graph and see what that does. So the original graph was already there, and then whenever I hit graph, it adds my new graph, and you can see that it moved it up 1. So if I go back and I go down to the next one, and I do, again, graphing the second square, which is square root, x, and my parentheses. In this case, I want to go down, subtract 2. And so adding 1 moved it up 1. So I'm guessing that subtracting 2 will go down, move it down 2. And that does, in fact, do what I think it's going to do. So adding and subtracting a number outside of the radical will move my graph up and down in my y direction. So when I go back here, I'm looking at this, and this is actually a shift up or down. So let me look at my next set of equations that I want to look at. And so now I've got x, 2x, and 8x. And this time I'm going to have the radical over top of both of the terms. And my x is going to again go from -4 to 7. But my y I'm going to change from -4 to a +8. So I can see everything that's going on. So I'm going to go back and grab my calculator. And I'm going to plug these in there. So I push my y equals button. And my first one was fine. I was going to leave it just as it was, so I have my original base equation to work with. And then this one needs to change into a 2x. So I'm going to insert. And I have a little delete button, so if I hit second delete, that actually inserts a 2. And then I can delete off these. Oops, now I've got to type it all over again. So second square root, I wanted a 2x here, 2x, and in my parenthesis, come down, And I'm going to need to insert an 8x on this one. And I would like to delete those two items off of there. And if I just want to look at my first equation, I see these little dark boxes around my equal signs here. I can enter and get rid of those. So when I hit my window and change that to an 8, because we wanted our window button right here, to go from -4 to 7 and from -4 to 8, I can then hit graph, and you'll see again our base function here, which is y equals square root of x. I go back to y equals, and I turn the next one on and graph it. You'll see the other one starts at the same exact point, our origin, but then it's just a little bit steeper. And so then if I go back to my y equals and I turn my third one on, oops, I just deleted one again. I quit deleting things. And I want to turn that one on. You'll see that that one will probably get even steeper still. Okay, so that 8, or the number in front of it, is kind of like a slope in our line, where it's actually the steepness of our function here. And so we can go back and we can look at that. And we see that this part right here is actually how steep. Now, it's not really a slope, but it is how wide our half of our parabola kind of looking thing will be. So you can think of it that way. And the last thing to look at when we look at these equations would be, what if we were adding or subtracting and it's under the radical? So these are the ones we're going to look at here. So we're going to put an x plus 2 under a radical and an x minus 3 under a radical. And I'm going to leave the domain and ranges the same on my window. And we can take a look and see what that does. So I push my y equals button again on my graphing calculator. Whenever I go down. And I'm going to leave my first one, which is my base. I'm going to delete that 2 off of there. And then I'm going to insert a plus 2. And then on the bottom one, I'm going to delete that 8 off of there. And I'm going to insert a minus 3. Again, I want to look at these one at a time, so I'm going to just enter on those boxes on the equal sign so I can only see my first one. And I graph it and I look at it, and there's my base one. I go back and press my y equals. I'm going to come down and turn that one back on and graph it. And you're going to see that that one, oh, that one moved left. Okay, so adding 2 actually moves me left. And then I go back and turn my third one on. And if adding 2 moved me left, subtracting 3, you would think would move me right. And it does, in fact, move me right. So this is another shift. So when we're looking at this, these right here are a shift. And this is going to be a shift left and a shift right. So we're starting to look at equations and what parts of them do. So if we have a number being multiplied by our x inside our radical, it's making it a steeper. If we are adding or subtracting outside the radical, we are moving up and down. And if we are adding and subtracting inside the radical, we are shifting left and right. So if we wanted to write an equation of a square root function, and the starting point was 3, 4. So just a quick graph here, 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4. So basically we're looking at what would be an equation of that. Well, I would start with my y equals, and then I would have my radical. Now, we didn't say that it needed to be steeper or not steep, so you can have an x, a 5x, a 7x, a 1/2 x, does not matter. And then inside the radical, we're shifting us left and right, right? So if we want to move it right 3, we would subtract 3. In this case, we want to move it right 3, right? 1, 2, 3. So we would subtract 3. But then we want to move it up 4. If we look back here, back to here, This is where we moved it up and down, and that was outside our radical, moved it up and down. And adding 1 moved us up, and subtracting 2 moved it down, so it's just like it would you would think of it normally. So we want to move it up 4, so then outside my radical, I would go up 4. So that equation right there should move and have a shift where my starting point would be at 3, 4.